Hi, everybody. Welcome to Let's Clear the Air podcast. My name is Faraz Rizvi, Special Projects Coordinator here at CCAJ. Joining me is Liz. Sorry, what's your last name?
Sena.
Sena, yes.
I have to say, it's Sena, not Sena,
Okay.
because...
I was going to say Sena, and I was like, I don't think that's right.
So this is like kind of a little ongoing joke.
Okay.
So a lot of people do say Cena because of the wrestler John Cena, but that's spelled with a C, right? So my last name's spelled with an S. And I remember asking even my father-in-law, like, how do you know that that's how you pronounce it, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, how do you say senator? And I was like, oh. So now during one of the city council meetings, they kept like screwing up my last name. So finally I was like, it's Sena, like senator. And so on the comments, we have like a little thread going on, and it was like senator, like we just started making fun. So
Senator Sena, all right.
Yeah.
I like that. You know, Liz is joining us from SFCC, the South Fontana Concerned Citizens. And we're just going to be talking about what's going on in Fontana, the warehousing issue just in general, the ISR, and just everything that's going on. So let's take it from the top. How did SFCC form? Like, how did you start organizing in Fontana?
So it all started during the pandemic, during the quarantine time. I remember seeing my buddy's post one day. It was Eddie Lopez. He's another founding member. And he was pretty much saying, we were talking about how there's just no restaurants, no sit-down restaurants, no shop, no retail, no nothing. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, you know, I've had this conversation before with other people, and I've kind of come to the same conclusion too. So before, that was in October, I think, and by November, we had started our own community meetings over Zoom, because that's all we could do at the time, right? Because it was a pandemic. And then next thing we said, all right, let's just organize. Let's call what are we going to call ourselves? And we said, okay, we will be the South Fontana Concerned Citizens Coalition. And so at first it was a very lengthy name, but then when you think of everything that goes into that name, it's so true. I mean, we do represent the south side of Fontana because we see different concerns than the north side does. We have different problems. We have different issues. And so then the concerned citizens, I mean, we live there. We're residents. We live there and we are concerned.
Right.
And we are ultimately a coalition, right? And so we that's one of the things that we do move forward to, is trying to take action, because that's where you see results sometimes, is taking action.
Right. And so since you've started organizing with SFCC and with other community members, what are you seeing as like the biggest challenges or biggest issues in Fontana? Or the biggest obstacles to your community?
To be frank, I would say the biggest obstacles end up being our city council representatives, especially our mayor. And I had made the decision very early on to try to abstain from saying anything negative about her, because I didn't want to put myself in that light to just, put her down, say negative things about her. But instead, I made the decision to want to educate the community, to want to tell them, like, look, guys, this is how it's supposed to be. In a normal, situation, in a normal world, this is how it typically plays out in a city. However, and if they were to see that, they would see that in our city, it's not happening that way. And I think that a lot of residents are realizing that the way it's supposed to be is not the way that it's actually happening.
Right.
And so I would say that ends up being the biggest obstacles with our local officials essentially being bought out.
Right.
Our city probably does need, any city would need a lot of money, would need investors coming in, would need developers. But the problem is, how do you balance it? How do you say, okay, we'll take some, but let's put a pause. Let's see what the community needs, especially us in the South. We were one of the original communities that was built there. And in a sense, our community is so well oiled that we don't really need too much. We've learned to kind of take care of our own little areas, you know, to our parks and stuff like that, to where we don't really need our parks to be as serviced as much. However, now when we start to see new developments in other areas of the city, we're extremely happy for them, of course. But then we look at our own parks and we say, well, there's a couple of things that we could add to this park to make it, you know, up to date, you know, and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's difficult. And so to answer your question, it is our city leaders who I feel that are the biggest obstacle in dealing with the warehouses.
It's gotten to a point where it seems just completely unsustainable, but they're still jam-packing it with warehouses. Like, the fact that so much community opposition has risen against the warehousing hasn't stopped them. And that's the shocking part, is like, when is enough enough? When are you going to hear enough community members and be like, you know what, we actually do need to respond to the needs of the community? And so in a lot of ways what you're saying sounds like, you know, the community is just not in charge or not in control of what its features and characters look like. And so, and you know, like, we all know that in some sense, right? Like, we've been to the planning commission meetings, and it's like call after call after call is begging them, like, don't approve this warehouse, and they'll just do it anyways, you know? And so, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, that's the part that I just don't understand, is the warehouse is being built right next to the high school.
Right.
You were there,
I couldn't believe it.
right?
I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's like one thing to know, but when you see it, you're like, this is because it's built right next to the high school that's already ringed around with warehouses. So you're like, how are they even going to drop people to school?
It was crazy because same thing. We saw it on the paper. We
Yep.
saw it on the map. We knew that it was there. But I think in our minds, we thought that the reality was going to be much larger of a distance. And when we got there that day to film, it was like, oh my God, it's closer than
Yeah.
what we thought.
It's on the lot.
Yeah.
It's on the lot. Yeah, it's practically, might as well build it over the high school.
Yeah, exactly.
Which tells you everything about what they think about Fontana, right? And what they think about the future of South Fontana, right? Like, they don't really consider those high schoolers as people who are going to go on to, you know, have something more than a warehouse job.
I think that has to be by far the most upsetting thing I have had to encounter, was the mayor trying to normalize warehouse jobs. Yeah. And I'm not saying that warehouse jobs are bad, but to say that we need to prepare our youth for these jobs, as a parent, it's insulting. It's insulting to think that I, as a parent, do not have higher ambitions for my own child.
I agree with what you're saying, right? Like, it's not the warehouse job that is the problem. Like, if someone grew up and said, I want to be a warehouse worker, I want to be the best warehouse worker ever, like, that's their prerogative. That's something they dream of. That's what they want to do, and that's something. But when you have a socioeconomic condition where the only option for you to make it, to have any stream of income, is a warehouse job, that's just not okay. Like, you're forcing people to work those jobs just to get by. Jobs that don't pay living wages. We all know what the working conditions of people who work in Amazon factories is. It's not nice.
Yeah.
It's not like a place where you have benefits, you have upward mobility, you have capacity to have a career. I mean, there aren't those options. And so I think it's really sad because, like, for example, like, I'm a millennial. I'm, like, a little right in the center, right? And I think as someone in the younger generation of the Inland Empire, I see that there's so many people among my generation who have a lot of aspirations, ideas. I mean, they're brilliant. You know, they're doing things, they're making brands, they're doing this, they're doing that. Some make music, some, there's a lot of ambition here. But in so many ways, like, being in the IE is the worst place to be as a young professional. There really is not much capacity for that upward mobility. If you want that, you need to go to at least Orange County, better yet LA. And there's this huge brain drain of talent that happens because you're either going to San Diego or you're going to LA or you're going to OC. You're not staying in the IE. And it's like all that's left is warehouse jobs. And I think it's the bulk of our economy at this point, which especially since the COVID pandemic where, shopping is just increasingly migrating online, there's a boom in it. They're more lucrative than ever. So it's the city council, it's the planning commission. On the other side of it, it's industry. They're just looking at this region like it's ours,
And one of the things that I wish would have happened very early on would have just been, again, balance, to where you say, as a city official, we have power in this. We have the power to dictate how it's going to go. And at the very minimum, you could say, for every warehouse that comes in, we are going to want a piece of greenery, something to give back to the community. Not developer, pay a development fee into the general fund. Because the general fund can be very much utilized in the north side.
Right.
Versus the south side, which is being impacted.
Yeah.
And so I think back to the fight that we had on that same corner lot right next to the high school, where we fought and fought and fought. And in the end, our community fought so much that we secured the corner lot to be a retail strip that will have a sit-down restaurant. And the developer will have to pay about $840,000 towards the development of that sit-down restaurant.
Wow.
We did that.
Yeah.
We did that. It wasn't the city mayor. It wasn't the city council saying, this would be good for... No, it was we fought and fought and fought until finally something was given to us.
Right.
Because had we never spoken up, they wouldn't have done that on their own. I don't think they have the capacity to see past the profit. All they see is profit. And it's hard for them to see how the decisions that they make are going to truly impact the community.
Right.
Only the community can tell you that because they live there.
Right.
And these concerns should be taken heavily as opposed to with a grain of salt. And
it helps when the city council members don't live there.
Oh my gosh.
They don't even, I think it's like the most underrepresented area is South Fontana.
Yeah, and the only person I believe that truly understands the impact is our council member, Jesse Sandoval. Because he commutes, he takes his grandson to school, and so he's there, he sees it. If any other official comes down, it's on a weekend, it's after traffic's gone.
It's one thing to feel the daily impacts of the congestion, of the air quality, of seeing the health impacts around your community. If you're coming down for a weekend for a ribbon cutting ceremony, you're never really going to fully understand the impacts, and this is something we see a lot in environmental justice, right, in our EJ organizing, is that, like, frontline community members always really understand the stakes far more deeply than a lot of the politicians that are supposed to be representing them.
Yeah. I want to add to that too. I remember some of the first conversations that I had with CCAJ, and how awesome you guys were in just saying, how can we help?
Mm-hmm.
Let us know how we can help. And I'm over here thinking, well, help. I do need help.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was difficult for me to say what type of help I needed. And to a certain extent, I was almost expecting you guys to tell me what it is that I needed. But then when I took a step back and I realized, well, this is our community, right? This is my community, and no one else is going to know it better than us. And so in order for you to help us, I'd have to tell you exactly the type of help that we need.
Mm-hmm.
And although many other cities are facing the same issues, each city and each community faces a very different issue, right? Based on its community members, its residents, and what it has nearby. So while Fontana and Bloomington are very, very close by, they're going to have their own special needs and their own special
concerns
than, than we do.
Right.
Even though the overall picture is,
similar.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think it's important for each and every community to take a step back and really look and see what is needed in their own.
Right. I think that's a really good comparison, because it also shows that, you can't just have a one size fits all approach to environmental justice. It's really about empowering the community members.
Yeah.
And that's really the only solution here. And one of the things that we've been seeing is that with the ISR has passed the indirect sources rule, which was a big victory. And on top of that victory, where we're seeing, hopefully in the long run, we'll see that environmental health impacts of diesel trucking decrease, right? Because there will be more zero emission trucks on the road. The other side of it is that developers are now saying, okay, well, the air quality issue isn't there anymore. So are we free to come in? As from an environmental health standard, we've done what you needed. Which is not true, because the implementation of the rule is still complicated and they're still trying to find loopholes, but it's just industry talking points, right? And it's like, at the end of the day, the issue of the trucks was just one side of the environmental justice issue. That's just one dimension of the problem. At the end of the day, it really ends up making people just disheartened and lose faith and trust in these democratic institutions. Like, how are you ever going to feel that voting makes a difference, that these politicians represent you, when you're actually mobilizing and it's not working? Like, you're actually getting out there and telling them, this is what we need, this is what we elected you for, do this. And
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was having a little conversation earlier of this same conversation. So if no one else can come to save this community has to save itself. There's no other way to
facts.
it. Yeah. This community, we have to do it ourselves, and we have to fight. So what does that look like? Let me take a step back and let me look. And I realized 60%, if not more, of our community is Hispanic based. I know I'm Hispanic. What does that mean? That means that growing up in our culture, we were taught not to talk back. We don't disrespect our elders. We don't rattle the cage. We stay quiet. We don't make noise. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, even for our parents who may have come here from other countries, in those countries, there is no democracy. It's nothing but corruption. They don't utilize voting. They don't vote. So when they come to this country, they're not accustomed to voting or exercising that right. Perhaps they don't even know that is their own right. And they also may not be able to vote based on their citizenship. And so again, it reverts back to, don't rattle the cage, stay quiet, don't make too much noise, just, fly below the radar. And we'll just have to endure whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And so the real thing is to mobilize that. Mobilize and reach out to our own community members and empower them and inspire them to make a difference and know that we are all in this together and every single person counts. And everyone being involved has the power to make a difference. And it's kind of like a two-sided coin, because at times I'm like, well, it's only me. I can't do much. And yet if I take a look at how much I've already done, you realize you really do have the power to do just you. The best part, the highlight of all of this, has been hearing our Hispanic women on the line calling in Spanish. It is amazing. I remember the planning commission and meeting that we all attended, and this woman, I feel so bad, I'm like getting bad with names, but she came on the line and she let the planning commissioners have it. And the words that she said in Spanish hit my soul differently, because it was like, I felt like I was being, reprimanded. Yeah. When in fact she was reprimanding them. And it's powerful. It's powerful to see that there are no boundaries. There shouldn't be any boundaries. And that people can utilize their voice in whatever language they choose to. And that shouldn't be an obstacle.
I'm glad you brought that up with, the women who are leading the charge, because that's one thing even about the history of the CCAHA is that it was founded by mothers and women who were seeing the impacts in their community and on their children, and who stood up, and that's where we get the first Superfund site of the Stringfellow. But it's historically environmental justice in this region has historically been led by women of color, and so I think that's one of the really powerful things about environmental justice and just about the movement here that spans from SFCC to CCAHA to all the other coalitions in Bloomington as well and Riverside, and it's powerful. It really is, and I think that's how we build power, really, as a community.
Absolutely. I think that you think to yourself, okay, this is the type of community I want to live in. You picture it in your head on how you want to raise your kids, what it's going to look like, where you're going to walk them to, how it's going to be when you go to the store, all these things with your kids. And when I look at my community, I'm like, it doesn't really look like what I had imagined in my head of what it was going to look like. And we always say, well, we can move to Beverly Hills, we can move to nicer, more beautiful communities. But why do I have to move? Why can't I just have that where I am now?
Right.
And for 1,000 other reasons of why it isn't, I just want to be the one reason why it is. And whatever I can do, I don't know that I will remain in Fontana forever. I don't know that. I don't know even in the house that I live in. We're slowly but surely outgrowing it. But while I am here, I am going to do everything that I possibly can to create a future, to create a community that I somewhat thought of in my mind, or what I want it to be, that will allow my children the opportunity to enjoy it. And I believe if I start now, by the time they're, a little bit older, they can start to freely roam around the community. I want to create a community where I live now versus going away to another place.
That's really powerful. It teaches your kids that this is how you stand up, and that what you said about the generation before you, kind of not wanting to rattle the cage and, kind of prioritizing endurance and resiliency over action, that flips, So I think that I really love that, and I think that's really powerful.
And I think it's very important for the younger generations to really realize that and know that they have power. A lot of us community members that have continuously called in feel like we get dismissed and gaslit, right? Mainly dismissed. But when a kid calls in, how do you dismiss a kid's voice? How do you dismiss a kid's concern? And these are the ones. This is who we're leaving it for. And
this is who the fight's for.
Yeah, it's who the fight's for, and they are the ones that get to benefit from our fight. As you get older, you start to realize that it's not about you anymore. It's about the future. And what are we leaving to them?
Right.
Are we going to leave just a whole bunch of warehouses, a whole bunch of, who knows? Who knows if at some point the e-commerce decides to die down and things shift, in the future. Right. And all we're going to be left with is a bunch of warehouses everywhere. What are we going to do with them?
Right. I was reading this report. I think it's in a book now called Fulfillment, and the author, I'm forgetting his name, but they essentially go to different areas in the country and just study the Amazonification that he calls it of the country, just fulfillment centers, distribution centers, and he goes to the city of I believe it was Detroit. I'm blanking a little bit on the specifics of the details. But essentially, the place where the current fulfillment center is located was built over the old steel plant. And there are people who used to work at the old steel plant that were working in the fulfillment centers. And that steel plant, when it first opened up in 1958, it was paying people $35 an hour. Union wages, full benefits. Wow. In 1958. That's just what were their expenses in 1958? That's how you build equity and buy houses. And the same people who used to work there before it closed down, there were some people who worked at the fulfillment centers who would end up getting terminated because they were just so against the way the fulfillment centers were ran. They were trying to unionize. And imagine you went from 35 an hour to 15, and people are saying, "Oh, that's higher than minimum wage. That's a good job." It's not. You're not making anything.
The disconnect.
Yeah, it's just. I think it's really sad what's really happened to working people in this country, to working communities. Fontana is a working class community, and back in its heyday, it was also the main part of the economy was a steel plant, and that was the backbone of Southern California construction. It was I think it was the iron ore in Coachella. There was a steel mill or a mining operation, and then they would send it to Fontana, and then Fontana would send it elsewhere, and that was a huge part of the economy, and it went bust. And now, same thing, warehouses just not paying close to what those steel plants were paying.
Yeah. So you're bringing in new development, but how do you retain your community residents? There's just so much disconnect, and I think that the more that we talk about it, the more that people could hopefully realize that they're not alone, right. That, and that everyone wants better. And one of the things that I've been saying lately is as a whole, our city is doing great, because when you take what's going on with, North Fontana, that's great. It really is. But the South is being negatively impacted. And so if as a whole we are not doing well, we're not thriving. Mm-hmm. That there's That in itself, our community that is being impacted by these warehouses is not thriving.
Yeah.
And that is a problem.
Yeah.
And so as a whole, we need to do better.
Yeah.
As a whole, and we need to incorporate all of our communities from each end.
Yeah, that's true. And so I think we're gonna have to wrap up soon.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
But if just the last thought for anyone who's watching, who wanted to get involved, who heard you and said, "I want to help Fontana," what would you say is the one thing that they can do that would help?
It's almost hard to narrow it down to one thing, but if I were to say to narrow it down, it would be as simple as spreading the word, spreading the word to others,
Right.
and having other people become more aware. Now, I wanted to say would be to attend the city council meetings, but what's going to happen soon is that we're going to move away from the virtual into in-person. And so if someone who lives someone who doesn't live in Fontana were to want to participate in these city council meetings, they'd have to actually attend in person. And I know that becomes challenging, but there's always forms of they can call in to the city to the city hall. They could write emails. But overall, we do have our Facebook page, which is the South Fontana Concerned Citizens Coalition, and we do have our Instagram page. We also have a website, and it's just sharing this information, getting it out to other cities. It's really hard. It's really hard to narrow it down to one thing because there's so many things that we need help with, but I think it would be that. It would just be reposting, resharing,
Supporting.
Supporting, and taking the time to listen and read what we're putting out there and what we're saying, and I think that would be it.
Good. Yeah. Well, for all of those listening to our Let's Clear the Air podcast with our guest Liz Sena, as in Senator, join, like their Facebook, like their Instagram, and keep in tune next time we have this podcast. Thank you.
Yeah.